Ladies and gentlemen, just before I get into my speech, I'd like to state one fact that has been mentioned briefly by Austin. And this is a simple statistic that 60% of people on the minimum wage currently are women. And standing up here as a representative of St. Angela's College, I wish to make clear to everyone that we will not make anyone a sandwich for less than the minimum wage. And none of you are laughing, and that's really awkward for me. And I'm just going to go into my speech and hopefully avoid any more failed attempts at humour. So, I'm up here today as a child speaker to strongly oppose the motion that this House would abolish the minimum wage. Now, Charlotte's already spoken to you about the principle and the practicalities of this, and I'm going to be expanding this by talking about exploitation, which is hilariously relevant, thank God. But first, I think I'm going to deal with the rather sizable amount of refutation I have. In fact, I think there's about 3 pages. And I'm hoping I still have all of them. I'm going to start with the last speaker there. Now, he came up and gave a very passionate speech, and he dealt with 2 common themes. He talked about the past, the future, and the present. And, that's been done as well, looking to the future. And another common theme he brought up was that no jobs is bad. And I was very thankful for him for that. Another thing I was thankful for, that he talked about how bad social welfare is, and how we shouldn't encourage reliance. But then earlier in his speech, he said that, if people don't have enough jobs, they'll go on social welfare, but the good thing is that he said, is that it'll be their choice. It'll be their choice, they won't be forced on social welfare. And I'd like to point out that this is a wonderful rhyme, by choice or by force, not that don't rhyme at all, sorry, being on social welfare is still bad. He also said that apparently you gain self-value when you're being employed for, less than the minimum wage. Personally, I wouldn't feel too good of myself if I'm being employed for, €1 an hour, thank you. Oh yes, and then he kind of accused the government of not looking out for the poor. But the government are looking out for the poor by preventing exploitation, by having a minimum wage, so people can't be paid, this ridiculously low amount. Well, thank you, which will happen. And I just like to bring up the main things that kind of came up were people talking about that the government won't pay too little, they won't pay too little, they'll pay value for money. And I'm going to go back to the first proposition. We talked a lot about rights, and he made it sound like everyone's going to price themselves and are going to refuse to work for less. And this came up again and again. And he even tried to convince us that some companies who apparently don't invest in Ireland because of the minimum wage, they won't try to pay less. They conveniently forgot the minor problem of, say, the recession. They told us that people wouldn't work for less. They'll go and work for someone else if they're not being paid the right amount, which was, again, brought up a lot. Unless, maybe, perhaps, maybe, there isn't another wonderful higher paying job that suits their skill level and pays according to their own personal evaluation, which was brought up so many times. No, thank you. Maybe they're desperate. Maybe they'll take any money they're going to be offered because they haven't got a job, because they need to live. And this is where the exploitation comes in, and I'm going to deal with it later in my speech. And then the second proposition Joe came up and told us why we should abolish things. That was actually the name of his first point. And I'm sure that was good. I'm sure you could apply the same argument to pretty much anything he didn't like. He admitted himself that people won't work less for the dole. And this is the second point that came up, ladies and gentlemen. And yes, that's true. I'll wholeheartedly agree. People aren't going to work, a really, a bad job if the dole is going to be offering more. So what's going to happen? They're going to go on the dole. And yes, it will be by choice. But they're going to be on our already overburdened dole system. They're going to be on our social welfare system, which this isn't a good thing. We should be encouraging people to contribute to society. And this is what, yes.
That would mean that demand will be, supply for labour will be less, and the cost of labour will go up.
Or, sir, it'll mean that the government will end up having to foot the bill for everyone who's on the dole, who's not working, who's not contributing to society. It's not a good thing. You can't make a lot of people being on social welfare a good thing, sir. And Zoe kind of brought this up as well. She said that according to Shakespeare, the world is well staged. And now my English teacher, who's sitting here today, is going to be delighted with me, because I agree, because Shakespeare is always right. The world is well staged. And everyone must play their part, just to conveniently finish the phrase, because I don't. And we have to encourage Shakespeare, and not just in schools, but in everyday life, because he's always right. Everyone must play their part. They must be encouraged to work and contribute to society, not to rely on social welfare. They're not to be encouraged to do that, because that's, it's not a good thing. No, thank you. Thank you. And she said, if they're going to be exploited, which is what's going to happen, that's what they'll do. They'll go on social welfare. This is going to come up again and again, I'd say, because it came up again and again. And she told us that everyone must suffer the burden of the recession, because apparently there just aren't enough rich people in Ireland, so we must attack, and yes, Zoe, attack the poorest. No, thank you. She encouraged us also to compete, and this came up a couple of times, compete with foreign companies. And, I think that's a good idea. Maybe we should also abolish our regulations and reduce working conditions. And I think that would work a lot better for competing with places like India and China. Thank you, sir. And another proposition, Andrew, he did quite a job, ladies and gentlemen. He came up here and he looked into the future. He counted one person plus another person equals 2 people working. And then he revealed the hidden face of the employed, which is apparently people get beaten and whipped and you can't say anything to the government. I personally didn't know that. I thought it was horrifying. I'm never going to get a job. I'll go in social welfare. He even ended his speech in Irish. I mean, what a man. Unfortunately, I can't say I agree with him. My main problem was that his long-term plan, which he developed using his, again, wonderful foresight into the future, was that he encouraged, and yes, he talked about ignoring, and I'm afraid he did encourage ignoring the poor people, again. He encouraged, the long-term plan he encouraged was, to benefit the rich people, the company owners, the business owners. He said that the poor will suffer and that'll kind of suck, but it'll work out in the long term. And I'm sorry to tell you, because then he tried to make it sound like he wasn't in aid of like the local businesses and the less people, but it's going to be the local businesses to suffer because there's going to be less money in the local economy, and that's going to be what's happening, and that means less business. And I'm sorry, that was a very badly said point because I'm in a rush to get onto my actual point. The exploitation. The proposition have come here today and argued that if someone's willing to work for less, why not let them? And why shouldn't we? No one's properly explained this. Why shouldn't we allow society's most desperate? And here, I'd really like to stress the difference between willing and desperate. Work for 50 cents an hour. Why shouldn't we allow the profit-driven company owners and the business owners to decide the wages of those who are driven to such dire straits that they will work for practically nothing just in order to survive? Because, ladies and gentlemen, that's exploitation. I don't want to get into the historical roots of the dictionary definitions, but to put it down to basics, exploitation is bad. The proposition can dress up all they like and talk about working for your money and pricing yourself. And somehow you would suggest that this will increase employment, but it's, in the end, it's going to be exploitation. You're putting the power to pay the people the lowest possible amount, not in the hands of the government, who are looking out for the people, I'm afraid, to point that out to you. You're not putting it in their hands, you're putting it in the hands of the company owners, the business owners, who in the end care about one thing, their profit. And are we to risk exploitation just for the sake of having 10 more people employed because they get to pay them less? No, we can't. We can't allow this to happen, ladies and gentlemen. We can't allow society's most vulnerable to suffer. Desperate times do call for desperate measures, but this does not mean we should allow these people to be pushed to below our social standards because the proposition like to pretend that will help in the long run, even if they do have future foresight. It won't help. It can't help. And for all these reasons, I beg you to oppose.
Chairperson, adjudicators, members of the opposition, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jack Maloney and I'm here tonight on behalf of Rockwell College to propose the motion that this House would abolish minimum wage. My teammate Joey Dorfman spoke to you about firstly why we abolish things and secondly why the minimum wage is unnecessary and why it is harmful. I'll be expanding on these points by firstly looking at different types of protection and analysing why one type of protection is good, the other type is bad, and secondly how the minimum wage is incompatible with long-term economic planning. Then I will be summing up this debate on behalf of the proposition. Now I will start off with my first point. The relationship between government and business and how that should be in harmony, and how a government can still take care of its citizens while maintaining a balanced relationship between the two. How governments can successfully intervene into the economy, but how the minimum wage disrupts the harmony between both of them. As Joey has already said, we as a society have already got protections in place that eliminate the need for the minimum wage, and we have a safety net in place that protects our workers from poverty. Social welfare is an automatic line of a minimum standard of living our government is already deemed to be acceptable. The minimum wage is therefore unnecessary, no thank you. It's therefore unnecessary, it's harmful to business. So it needs to be abolished. Ladies and gentlemen, let me draw a distinction between protections such as social welfare and the Equality Act and other protections such as the minimum wage. No thank you. Government interventions such as social welfare shelters our citizens from poverty without harming our economy. The Equality Act, for example, protects our workers from employers who intentionally try to harm their employees. That's what our government does. What we don't want our government doing, however, is restricting business, because business's job is it to make a profit, and that is good, and therefore it creates employment, also good. We shouldn't restrict that in any way. We should solely shelter our citizens from ruthlessness and poverty, and that's what we're already doing. But no, thank you. But what the opposition do not understand is that we want to attract business to our economy. And that when we talk about businesses, we're talking about huge tax revenue and sources of employment. We're not talking about big fat cats that want to rip everybody off. Yes, sir.
Would you really force a large expert society to suffer just for making benefit of glorious motherland?
Workers will not suffer. We have already social welfare in place. We all demand and supply will take care of the rest. We will not suffer. No, thank you. Businesses are a driving force in our society, and that's what you're forgetting. And by acting in their interest, they are serving our own interest. We need a more realistic approach to it. A minimum wage, as Joey has demonstrated, makes us uncompetitive and therefore unattractive to business. No, thank you. Realistically, businesses know no boundaries. They do not need to do business here. They can go wherever and whenever they want. There's no point protecting our citizens in the workforce if we limit their opportunities of becoming part of the workforce. No, thank you. Protection does not need to restrict anybody. It can serve the interests of all parties at the same time. This is what Joey meant when he referred to an economic ideal being the harmony between business, employees, and government. Now that I've looked at protection, I will now look at why the minimum wage is incompatible with long-term economic planning. I'll be analysing this more in depth as proposition I've already might have mentioned. The damage done by short-term economic planning, such as the minimum wage. Good governments, ladies and gentlemen, act in our long-term interest, especially when it comes to economic issues. Seeing as the minimum wage sets a constant in a fluctuating environment, it is incompatible with long-term planning. It is a product of its time. It is set with yesterday's facts and not tomorrow's. Short-term planning, Short-term planning is often populist and serves the sole purpose of aiding re-election. It's interesting to note that the minimum wage is introduced only ever in good times, where very little people are affected, positively or negatively. Long-term planning, however, is more successful. It is well thought out and it is not considered in terms of popularity. It is strategic. It benefits the economy because long-term projects are not subject to economic fluctuations. And it would be quite unpopular to abolish the minimum wage, but the minimum wage is more bureaucratic and would simply take too long because democratic processes take too long. No, thank you. The buy-in plan is more accurate, it's more flexible, and it can change quicker, and there's no harm of exploitation because we already have protections in place. No, thank you. Now I'll come to my sum up of tonight's debate on behalf of the proposition. Today, however, we have spoken about many aspects of the minimum wage. The proposition and opposition have agreed on many issues. We all want to protect our citizens. We differ, however, on how we want to achieve this. The opposition believe that by imposing a minimum wage on business, we will have more spending power. St. Angela's and others have suggested we'll have more spending power. St. Jarlath's have said that it also stimulates the economy, presumably because people have more money to spend. But firstly, this is presuming that all money spent stays in Ireland. However, that is not true. We also buy imports and we export. We are an exporting nation. We're not an island with a lot of resources. No, thank you. Secondly, this also suggests it would be good for the economy if everybody would earn more on the minimum wage. We could earn 50 euros an hour on the minimum wage. Everybody would have a fancy car. Everybody would be drinking champagne and have big houses. However, it also pushes prices up. And the minimum wage makes it harder for workers to pay their bills. So it reduces choice. This is what it's about. This is what it's about. The opposition also seems to believe that all employees are greedy, are big fat cats that want to exploit everybody. But the businesses that are mainly affected by the minimum wage are small and medium enterprises. And these suffer the most. These are not multi-billionaires, and we rely on them for growth. So if the minimum wage is restricting them, we should support them, and we need them. And Neve has asked us, what happens if wage falls to welfare limits? The answer is simple. Nobody will work for welfare limits, and when supply falls, demand will rise, less people will be on social welfare, and on this note I beg to propose this motion.